Welcome to Doors to Hope and Healing, an inside look at foster care and adoption needs in Connecticut. My name is Jacqueline Ford. I have had the honor of working for the department for close to 30 years, and although I may be familiar with many of the topics I bring to you, I have invited experts in those fields to help dispel the myths and misconceptions that often act as barriers. Join us as we open our doors to an inside look at the Department of Children and Families. Sana, welcome to Doors to Hope and Healing. Thanks so much for being on our show today.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here today.
Well, it's wonderful. And on Doors to Hope and Healing, we love to be able to share positive stories about our kids, about our families, about our staff, and it's an opportunity for us to dispel those myths and misconceptions that often are barriers to our work. So we wanted to have you on today so that we can talk about your story, your lifespan of being involved with our department for almost 35 years now,
yes,
and how you came into the child welfare system just as a young child who needed that support and that care, to who you've become today. It's like, look at me now. So can you talk to our viewers a little bit about how you first became involved with the child welfare system?
Absolutely. So I became involved with the child welfare system at the age of 4. I have a twin brother, and we were abused severely by a lot of different people in our home. And so eventually we ended up going to a doctor's appointment. And at this doctor's appointment, it was discovered that I had been abused in many other ways. And so because of this, we were placed into the care of Department of Children and Families in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And so that began our journey in the welfare system. We were assigned a social worker, which I am happy to say was the social worker that I had my entire time while in care. And so when we were placed into the system, we were then put into a foster care home, which was still in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And the family that we were placed with were absolutely amazing. They were a pastor and a first lady who were just starting a church in their home, and they had been doing foster care and adoption for many years prior to us getting there. And at that point had actually adopted probably close to about 5 or 6 children, but were still doing foster care. And so we were there with them till we were about 7 years old. And after that, we ended up going for adoption.
And you were adopted by another family?
I was. So I was adopted by another family who was actually living at the time in New Britain, Connecticut. And so we ended up getting placed there in New Britain, and we were there for about a year, and then we were actually legally adopted.
And were you able to stay in touch with your foster family or the children that were in that home?
Yes. So the foster family that we were placed with, there were multiple children at the time. My brother and I were the youngest that were there, but we have developed relationships with our siblings, and we don't call each other foster brother or foster sister. We are brother and sister. And so through the years, we've been able to maintain a relationship with each other. Some of us live in state, some live outside of Connecticut. But those relationships have lasted to the point now where we even work together on projects. And so it's really amazing.
Oh, that's a wonderful story. So tell us a little bit about your adoptive family.
My adoptive family, William and Alberta Mayfield, are absolutely amazing. They actually chose us out of a book at their church. They had been licensed through their church. And so at that time, there were books, and you were able to actually go through the books and see the different stories of the children, and then choose who you basically wanted to adopt. And so they chose both my brother and I. When they initially were looking to adopt, they were only looking to adopt one child, specifically a daughter, because they already had a son. But they decided to go ahead and keep us together. And so they adopted both of us together.
So there was something about your pictures and your story that touched their hearts.
It was, and I will tell you, our story was very honest. You know, it talked a lot about the trauma that we had endured and what could possibly come, you know, in the years, but they still decided to look past that and to take us. And so for that, I'm forever grateful.
That's wonderful. And you were adopted at age 7? Is that when you were adopted?
We were placed into their home at age 7. We were legally adopted at the age of 8.
And you lived there with them until you were a young adult who could explore on their own?
Absolutely. So we lived there until we were young adults. And even though, you know, I'm no longer home, they're still my mom and dad. My father, unfortunately, passed away a few years ago unexpectedly, but I was a daddy's girl. And so they gave us literally the best that they could give us. You know, it was definitely rough because we did have a lot of effects from the trauma that we endured. But my mom and dad never gave up on us. You know, they kept doing what they needed to do. And so I think because of them and because their commitment to making sure that we were okay and had everything that we needed, not always everything we wanted, but everything that we needed, it allowed me to flourish and be who I am today.
So do you attribute who you are today to your experiences in foster care and in your adoptive home?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely contributed to just everything that I've gone through. I gained resilience and strength that I never knew that I could possibly possess. You know, and it was tough. You know, my foster care experience and just everything that I've been through, it hasn't been easy. I was a single mom, a teen mom. You know, I had a lot of different things that occurred to me through the years, but I wouldn't go back and trade any of it because it has definitely been what has guided my footsteps to where I am today.
Was there something in your experience with foster care or adoption when you became a young adult you thought to yourself, I wish I had had that experience when I was in foster care, or I'd like to see this be offered to foster children or adoptive children more so than it was? Because we're talking, you know, 30 years ago, the foster care system. And as you know, because we'll get to that in a minute about how you're invested in the work that we're doing today in the department, we've changed and we've grown and we have improved and we've come to understand the needs of children and families in a much more profound way. Is there anything you can think of back then that is so much different than it is today for our youth?
Wow. So I can tell you one of the things that I know that the department is really working on now is kinship care. Kinship care, and also really having a connection between the caregivers and the birth families. I really wish that that was something that I had back then. My mother was heavily addicted to drugs, but you know, in and out of it, there were moments where she would, you know, be sober, and in those sobering moments, she would find her way to our foster home, and she would knock on the door. She would wait outside and really trying to see us and just to make sure that we were okay. And back then, that was not allowed or tolerated. You could not come to the foster home that the children were in. And so my mom got into even more trouble just by trying to see her children. And I feel like if some of the policies and the initiatives that are happening today were happening 34 years ago, I can only imagine, you know, how my life would have certainly been a lot different. And I think it, you know, in some ways it could have possibly been better for me mentally and emotionally.
If you had had that. So you're referring to the Quality Parenting Initiative.
Absolutely.
Which is the work that our department is doing now.
Yes.
And it's engaging the birth family to have that relationship with the foster family. So when you reflect back to when you were young, although your mother may not have been in a position to care for you again, through the Quality Parenting Initiative work that we're doing now, your mom could have had a role in your life that wasn't frowned upon, where she didn't get in more trouble by visiting you. Tell us a little bit about that. I know that when when we've spoken before, you shared how you did your own research to find your mom.
Yes, so I did my own research. My social worker actually had put together a life book before we got adopted. That was one of the gifts that she gave my brother and I. So we each had a life book, and in this life book, it was photos and little paragraphs and descriptions of everyone that was in the photos. So it had a lot of my birth family, myself, my foster family, up until my adoption. So there was pictures of my adopted family and I. In this book, there were different activities that she had us write, just stuff in the book that was about our life. And so I was able to use the information that was in that life book to guide me back to finding my birth mother. And I will tell you, it wasn't hard to find her. She was still incarcerated. She had been in and out of incarceration like her entire life. So it wasn't hard to find her, but I will say that because my adopted parents were so open, they allowed us to have that connection with our birth mother at, in our teen years, which is something that they didn't have to do.
Right, right. And they embraced that because they saw how important it was for you to be able to close that loop.
Absolutely. They were doing the QPI, Quality Parenting Initiative, back then, before it became, a new thing that child welfare is doing now.
Right, before it actually had that title.
Yes.
That it had that work. So I think that, you're now involved with our work with QPI and the department, and you're sitting on our committees and task force to implement that model and to make sure that everybody understands it and that we have the buy-in from our staff and from our foster families, that they learn about the QPI initiative through their training and their post-training modules that they take. So now you're sitting and you're one of the voices, and how does that feel to be a former youth and now on a committee, making decisions?
It is extremely empowering. I'm honored, but it's also a responsibility that I don't take lightly, because having this opportunity to sit at the table amongst decision makers and to be able to share some of my own experiences and to be heard, I know that I'm speaking not just for myself, but I'm speaking for the Sana when I was 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, and the many Sanas that are still in care to this day who don't feel that they have a voice or don't know how to properly use it. I get the opportunity to use my voice to affect change and to make sure that, a lot of the things I endured emotionally and mentally and physically, they don't have to endure.
Oh, that's beautiful. You really are. When we met before, you said you had 2 different roads you could have taken. When you went through the journey through foster care and adoption, and the different traumas that you experienced as such a young child, and you definitely chose that path of a great purpose.
Right.
And your steps are numbered. And as a representative of DCF, I'm honored that you have a seat at those tables and that we can use your voice to affect that change. So I know that you started your own nonprofit.
I did.
Can you tell us about that and what your nonprofit is called?
Yes, so I started a nonprofit in 2018 officially. The work that I was doing was going on for years, which was really trying to just serve my community in any way that I could. In 2018, we made it official and we started Unashamed, Inc., which is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And it really started because of the things that I had gone through. Every initiative that we are involved in is something that is near and dear to my own personal journey. And so we do different initiatives that actually help to foster emotional health in disadvantaged families that are in the midst of incarceration, foster care, and teen pregnancy.
So those are the pillars of your work.
Yes.
And based on your own experiences. So tell us a little bit about what you've done in the community with your nonprofit.
So in addition to those pillars, we also do a lot of work with the homeless as well, and women that have been in domestic violence situations. And so we are going out in our communities, we are feeding the homeless, we are actually giving them water. One of the things that really struck me with the homeless is that while we were out one day feeding, one of the gentlemen said to me, well, what about water? On hot days, we always want water. And it just really hit me hard because you don't realize the depth of what they're going through. And something as easy as water is something that we can provide to our communities. And so Unashamed started going out and actually leaving styrofoam coolers filled with bottles of water and cut up oranges and apples in the areas around our communities that the homeless migrate to, so that they have that water. But in addition to that, with our teen moms, we do virtual baby showers that assist them with getting all of the support they need, from diapers to milk to car seats to cribs. We actually do bags for when youth are removed in foster care that have just different items that'll get them through the first couple of days being in care, whether it be activity books, things to read, playing cards, toiletry items, just things that are their own. That was important to me because I remember when we were removed, we left with nothing. We didn't have anything. And so just to have something to call your own when you're being placed into a new home is something really important that I think we kind of take for granted.
Yeah, I agree. And what better person to do that than someone who left with nothing and knows how important it is to have your own belongings.
Exactly.
So how are you funded? How do you get those items for the baby shower or the water and the coolers?
So we are completely funded through donations from the community. Thankfully, because we've been doing the work before we were even really established, people have gotten to know us. They know the work that we do in our community, and so they have been gracious enough to give us donations. So we receive donations all the time, and we're able to take those donations and fund the different initiatives that we do.
Wow, that is wonderful. Did you ever think you'd be a CEO and founder of your own nonprofit?
Absolutely not. Especially since I have no college degree. And so people don't, expect someone who doesn't have a college degree and was in foster care and adoption and all that stuff to come out and be able to actually be, running an organization.
And you absolutely can be. And a degree is, life experience, I think, is so much more powerful and important than that degree sometimes.
Right.
And you're the best spokesperson for this work because of all that you have been through. And you're articulate in every way, and it's been an absolute pleasure to meet you and see. And that's why I thought it was so important to have you on the show, because for our viewers that are watching, foster care or teens, youth, they have that stigma.
Right.
Just because of their age, let alone being a foster child in the system and being a teen. And I think that you're an example, as are many of our youth who have grown to be young adults and very successful and resilient, of what the stability and love of a foster family and an adoptive family and the community supports and the resources that are out there, what they can do to help catapult you to being a successful young adult.
Absolutely. It can literally change the trajectory of your life.
And that's why it's so important to have, those kin relationships that we can establish and find, and good foster families and, loving and devoted adoptive families too. And I know that you're also an author of your own book.
I am.
And what is the name of your book?
So I actually just released my book in October of 2020, and it is called Everyone Will Know It Was God. And so I am a woman of faith, and I know that everything that has occurred to me has been because God has had his hand on my life.
Share with our viewers a little bit about meeting your husband and that connection to foster care before we talk about your involvement with DCF and end our show today.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I was placed into foster care at a very young age. And at that time, the family that I was placed with was starting a church. And so during that time, they had friends who were also starting a church. Well, little did I know that years later, 20-something years later, I would be visiting a church in Middletown, Connecticut, which is where I currently reside. And as I walked up to this church, I saw this man that I never seen before, and I was like, oh my gosh, he's like gorgeous. And I could hear God say, "That's your husband." And so we exchanged numbers, we ended up dating, and then he brought me home to meet his grandmother. And when we got to the door and knocked on it and she opened it, she looked at me like she had literally seen a ghost. And she's like, "I know you." And my husband now was like, "You don't know her?" And she's like, "Yeah, I do know her." And she said, "Hold on." And she ran off to her room and she emerged a few minutes later and she handed me a picture. And the picture was me at the age of 4. That I had given her. So her and her husband were also starting a church, and they were friends with my foster parents at the time. And during that time, I gave them this school photo of me.
Wow.
And she held on to it for over 20 years. Like, that's amazing. So I know it was God.
It was God, and it was meant to be. I mean, that was meant to be. So as we're getting ready to conclude our show today, tell us about the exciting work that you're going to be doing as a contracted nonprofit with the Department of Children and Families this spring.
So I am super excited because my nonprofit organization has the opportunity to host a series of workshops for adolescents ages 13 through 17 and those that are aging out of care. We're going to be doing these workshops on both the northern side and the southern side of the state so that we can try to put our hands on as much kids as possible. And through these workshops, we're going to be doing anything and everything from talking about identity, body image, and loving yourselves, emotions, how to properly communicate, how to manage your finances, how to show up at a job interview, how to understand credit. So many different things that we're going to be discussing over 5 weeks. Mm-hmm. And these are going to be interactive workshops. They're not going to be your normal sit down at a seat and we talk to you from a PowerPoint. We're going to be getting out of our seats. We're going to be having fun. We're going to be engaging. We're going to be authentic and transparent and sharing our own stories of care and what we endured. And then we're going to end it with a huge graduation. Mm-hmm. Where we will have a surprise guest speaker and music and food and just really celebrating the youth that will have graduated from the series.
Well, that is remarkable. And I think that our kids are going to learn the life skills that you're going to give them the opportunity to leave this program with and graduate are really going to be a wonderful start for them as they begin their life, you know, as an independent youth.
Exactly. And through it, we're hoping that we're able to build relationship and that they can really add us to their support team so that as they begin to age out or as they're going through different things, they have someone to call. They can remember, let me call Sana from Unashamed. And I want to be able to be a mentor for these kids to kind of guide them through life.
Well, there's no doubt that this workshop will help with that transition of these kids being, independent and on their own, but having all of these supports and the resources that you're going to help them to create along with those that they already had, and giving them those tools. So I'm so excited to see your work and to visit your workshops and to continue our relationship. But thank you very much for being on our show today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. Next, we're going to show you a video of one of our youth in care, a profound statement about the work that the department's doing and how important it is to meet our youth where they're at. Thank you.
As someone who grew up in care without a foster home, I can speak to how challenging that made my life.
I was afraid that I was going to be homeless, and I didn't know where I was going to be when I, would have to pack up all my things.
It was scary to think that if something happens, who do I turn to? I don't have anybody.
I felt like, well, I already have family who don't care, so why would a stranger care about me?
Because I couldn't be matched with someone who was willing to give me a chance, I ended up subjected to more trauma in a setting that wasn't appropriate for me.
No one wants to be homeless, and, if that's the case, what do you do? What's the plan?
I think if I had been matched with a foster home, a lot of things probably wouldn't have happened to me.